coal mining from 1849 to 1949 in Nanaimo, BC, Canada was very important. The number one mine lasting from 1883 to 1938 and the Wellington mine lasting from 1871 to 1900 are two very important mines that are still remembered today in 2013 Nanaimo. In search of a better life, men and women would move from many different countries around the world to live in Nanaimo. Men would find work in the mines. Each and every day, men would descend in steel cages hundreds of meters below Nanaimo's surface to mine the black diamond. It was tough and dangerous work. Men would drill, blast, and then shovel coal and rock into waiting carts, hauled by mules. After the coal was cleaned and sorted, it would be transported to places like Vancouver, San Francisco, and Hawaii. Even in 2013, the Nanaimo mining era presence is still around the city. There are street signs named after mines. There are buildings named after Robert Dunsmuir at Vancouver Island University. He was a man who owned and operated many mines around the city and Vancouver Island. The Nanaimo Museum does a very good job in promoting the mining era in Nanaimo. It has a whole exhibit set up with artifacts and photos from the mining era in Nanaimo, BC. It lets locals and tourists know about the history of the city. Located at the foot of Milton Street in Nanaimo, BC, the number one mine raised 18 million tons of coal from 1883 to 1938, proving to be Nanaimo's most successful mine. The mine is most known for the 1887 explosion that killed 149 men in what was called a double explosion. This meaning there was unprepared and badly placed explosives in the mine, and also there was exploding gas that accumulated throughout the mine. Most of the men died right away, but some miners were trapped by debris. These miners wrote farewell messages in the dust of their shovels. A plaque at the foot of Milton Street commemorates the event. At the time of the explosion, many white locals blamed Chinese workers for the disaster, claiming the workers could not read signs or instructions. However, most miners, regardless of race, were illiterate. After 1927, Robert Dunsmuir owned and controlled number one mine, as he did many other mines around Nanaimo and Vancouver Island. Hello, I'm standing at the number one mine, Espelonde Memorial. What this sign talks about is the overall history of the number one mine, which was Nanaimo's largest coal mine from 1883 to 1938. What also this sign talks about is the 1887 explosion that killed roughly from 148 to 150 miners. What this sign does is commemorate the men that lost their lives in 1887 on a plaque, saying they are remembered. There's white men like Thomas Allen, but then the Chinese men down below are given numbers like 84, 76, 52. The white men were given their full names, Chinese just a number. It was a racial thing back in the day. On this side it gives history of the mine, so like 1,000 workers at its peak, 150 mules/horses. Started in 1883, closed down in 1938. There's lots of information a tourist or a local can come to this sign and learn about the mine that was Nanaimo's largest. The mine also operated out to Protection Island and Newcastle Island. At the foot of Milton Street and the corner of Espelonde Road lies the number one mine, Espelonde Memorial. There are two aspects at this location that tie the mining era of Nanaimo in with 2013. First off is the mine memorial itself, which promotes the number one mine, information of what happened at this mine, but also the history and the men that lost their lives during the explosion is explained on the sign. The second aspect is the road Espelonde, which shares its name with the mine. The number one mine was in a very good location in terms of transporting coal to places like Hawaii or Alaska, as it was very close to the ocean, as we see here from Espelonde Road. On the other side of these train tracks would lie the ocean. In 1852, the existence of coal was confirmed in what is today downtown Nanaimo. In 1852, Fort Rupert miners came to Nanaimo to work in the coal industry. Log cabins and bunkhouses provided shelter to the small, mainly male population.
The small settlement grew in 1854 with the arrival of 24 mining families from England. A neat row of small 600 square foot timber cottages were built along Front Street. The first permanent structure to be built in Nanaimo was the Bastion in 1852. The average population in Nanaimo in the late 19th century coal era was around 6,000 people. From then on, the population just grew, including a Chinatown in Nanaimo, BC. In 2013, downtown Nanaimo was very vibrant. Lots of shops, restaurants, bars, and even tourist hotspots on the waterfront. Downtown Nanaimo has amazing historical sites in 2013 to discover, like the HBC Bastion, the Great National Land Building, and dozens of old storefronts and bars along Victoria Crescent and Commercial Street. Take a walk past the old courthouse on Front Street and you'll feel as though the clock has turned back to the early mining days. A population census taken in 2011 showed the regional district of Nanaimo to be 146,574 people. The Bastion, the courthouse, and the Great National Land Building are a few aspects left of the mining era still around in downtown Nanaimo in 2013. The Wellington mines lasted from 1871 to 1900. The mines were owned and operated by Robert Dunsmuir, the man who discovered coal in the Wellington area in 1869. The mines are known for the Wellington Strike of 1890 to 91. This strike continued on for 18 months. The workers wanted better pay and to be recognized as a union. Robert Dunsmuir refused to meet any of the workers' demands, so the strike was noted as a failure. Many people were killed in the Wellington mines in the 30 years that the operation was active. Fires, mine explosions, cave-ins are just a few examples. The Wellington mine closed down in 1900 and the workers transferred to a new mine in Ladysmith. During the Wellington mines operation, Wellington was its own settlement. It was not part of Nanaimo as it is today in 2013.
Hi, I'm at Diver Lake in Nanaimo, BC at the Wellington Mines Memorial Sign. What this sign talks about is the history of the mine lasting from 1871 to 1900. What this sign also talks about is the explosion that happened on January 24th, 1888, that during the day 168 men were working and the explosion killed 77 men. This sign commemorates the men that lost their lives on January 24th, 1888 during the explosion by giving a plaque of the men lost, or some of the men lost, like John Baloney, but it also talks about Chinese men that lost their lives that day too. The difference here is that Chinese men were given numbers and not their names. So for a Chinese man, he'd be number 14, and for a white man, it'd be John Baloney. It was a racial thing back then, and it was recorded that way. On this side of the sign, there's just history of the mine and also the explosion that happened. Once coal was raised from under the ground at this location, it was sent to Departure Bay by wagon or by rail. From there, it would be sent around North America and around the world. Robert Dunsmuir was in charge of this mine as he owned it. He controlled the wages, work conditions, and the hours. Robert Dunsmuir did not agree with the workers on all of these. The workers said that the hours were horrible, the pay was horrible, and the work conditions led to many deaths. It took a long time for these workers and Robert Dunsmuir to agree on going back to work because there was a strike that happened. Robert Dunsmuir, on the other hand, has had a lasting impact on Nanaimo. There's a house named after him and also a building at VIU.
Where the Wellington mine was once located is now its memorial site at Diver Lake. In 2013, it is an area for recreational outdoor activities like soccer, baseball, dog park, tennis, hiking, and children's playgrounds. Tourists and locals can come here to enjoy the great outdoors, but at the same time pay tribute to the mining era in Nanaimo and learn about the Wellington mine. In the 1960s, the Wellington community was swallowed by the expansion of Nanaimo. Today, the name Wellington is used to refer to a fairly small area, expanding from Northfield Road to Long Lake and Brennan Lake. Long Lake in 2013 is used for a wide range of outdoor activities, mainly water sports. In 2013 at Departure Bay, there are many aspects of Wellington Mine still around, railways and shipping wharves. Wellington Mine operators would transport coal from the mine to Departure Bay, first by wagon, then by rail. From there, coal would be loaded onto ships from the wharves, then transported to places like Alaska. In 2013, Departure Bay is still a place for transportation. Now it's locals and tourists that are coming from the mainland to the island, or people from the island going over to the mainland.
If people would like to learn about the Wellington Mine No. 5 Memorial and the background of the mine overall, please visit the memorial on Diver Lake, Nanaimo, BC. You will learn a bunch of information about the mine just by looking at this sign.
On November 7, 2013, David Hill Turner, a curator at the Nanaimo Museum, agreed to have a one-on-one interview with me on the mining era in Nanaimo.
Hi, my name is David Hill Turner. I'm the curator at the Nanaimo Museum.
How long have you been part of the museum staff?
I've worked at the museum here since 2000, so that'll be 13 years.
Have you always lived in Nanaimo?
Well, like most people here, I came from somewhere else. I was working in the mainland before taking this job in Nanaimo. But since the late 70s, I've worked with museums in historic sites and national parks. So it was a logical extension. And also, I was living in Nanaimo, so it was more convenient for me because otherwise I was commuting to the mainland.
Exactly, there we go. So the reason I'm here today was about the mining in Nanaimo. So was this the main industry in Nanaimo during the time of the mines, which I understand from 1840 to 1940, roughly around then?
Nanaimo was created by the Hudson's Bay Company to mine coal. And at the time, the Industrial Revolution was arriving on the west coast of the Americas, and they needed coal to make steam. So primarily for steamships. So they had to find coal, but there was none here. The closest coal mines were down in Chile. So the Hudson's Bay Company was aware of coal on Vancouver Island, first at Fort Rupert, at the north end of the island. It was a very difficult coal to get out. Later, in 1850, coal was reported in Nanaimo, but they didn't really start mining coal here to September of 1852, when the first cargo was shipped out. So coal was primarily sent to California, and that was the main market for Nanaimo coal until about 1900 was California. After that, a lot of it started going to the lower mainland. Coal was mined in terms of, we think of the traditional old mines, until about 1938. And that's when the big No. 1 mine closed. But coal mining in Nanaimo itself didn't end until 1987. There was a big industrial mine up on Wolf Mountain. It operated from 1984 to 1987.
Perfect, thank you. What was the population roughly in Nanaimo during the mining years, and did it decrease after the mines closed?
Population varied during the mining years in Nanaimo. If there was a time there was a lot of demand for coal, because the demand for coal is cyclical, and the population might go up. If the demand for coal went down, people moved away or did something else. So we probably, looking back statistically, the average population of Nanaimo over the coal era was about 6,000 people.
Have you ever met anyone who would have worked in the mines?
Well, to talk about the old mines, we're looking at, in terms of the No. 1, the last miner, last time it was working was 1938. Yes, we met one person, a man named Ralph Wilson, who was in his late 90s, the last time I talked with him. And certainly he had a very good memory of working as a boy, or a young man, not a boy,
right.
in the mine here in Nanaimo.
That's impressive. Wow, 90 years old. If you've ever met anyone, have they told you what the conditions were like firsthand? So did he let you know? Or?
Well, mining conditions are pretty much standard. You're working underground, it's dark. In the later years, it was much safer. There was more controls in to control dust, for example, which was a major problem in mines. There was more for gas detection, gas removal. There were better safety standards than the early days. So even though it was used a lot of machines instead of physical work, it was still a very physical job working underground. And you'd be down there 8-10 hours a day, and that's what you did. You either operated machines, or you physically had to handle coal in some way, shoveling it, moving it. Of course, all the framing to support the roof structures all had to be done by hand. I have to admit, when you look at coal mines, it's just not coal miners. There might be 30, 40 trades working in the coal mine. Anything from plumbers to electricians to carpenters. It was a big operation involving a lot of different skills.
Perfect. Is there anyone still living in Nanaimo who would have worked in the mines?
There are still people living who worked in the Wolf Mountain Colliery. There are still people around who worked in what we call the smaller mines, the Jippo mines. Really, some of them operated until 1970, might be 2 or 3 men mining coal in one seam. But that's since then, there's not a lot of coal mining.
Perfect. Do families of miners ever come to the museum to gain information about their loved ones?
Nanaimo is quite remarkable in that there are so many families whose ancestors came here to work in the coal trade. And there are many people today who are descendants and still come to the museum. Of course, we have the big celebration of Princess Royal Day on November 27th. It celebrates the arrival of the miners from Brierley Hill in 1854. And it's quite remarkable, the people that come to that, not only from Nanaimo and elsewhere in British Columbia, but also from elsewhere in North America. Because people from Nanaimo spread out across the continent. And it's quite rewarding sometimes to meet people from different places who come back here because they want to learn about their family.
Really, that's crazy. That's good to know that they cherish it that much and promote it that much in the city. Do you think there's enough information presented to the Canadian people about the mining disasters in Nanaimo? For example, number 1, explosions and Wellington.
People are quite interested in mining disasters, and certainly Nanaimo had its share of big ones. For many years, the number 1 mine accident, where 150 men killed, was the largest industrial accident in Canada. It's now number 2, after another coal mine accident in Alberta. But I think there's 2 things here. I think we have to be aware of the hazards of the industrial workplace, I think, which is important, because some of the issues faced by miners are still ironically being faced by men who work in sawmills, men and women who work in sawmills. But I think from a provincial and community perspective, I think it's more of awareness of the heritage of mining in Nanaimo. We have a lot of people who have moved here in the last 10, 20 years who really don't know much about the early roots of the city as a mining center.
Okay, perfect. Where would these miners have found work in Nanaimo after the mines closed, if one stuck around?
A lot of the men who stayed after the mines closed, many of them went into working in the forest industry.
Makes sense.
Some did go to other places, because they're, for example, Alberta or southeastern BC, they were mining coal there. But many liked living here, and they chose to go into other trades. So in the 1940s, 1950s, that would have been primarily the forest industry, logging, sawmilling, and of course after 1950, the Harnack.
Right, okay. What was the average age of men working in the mines?
The average age varied over the years. You'd find boys going underground with a father, an uncle, an older brother, maybe in their mid to late teens. But it'd be very rare to find a man working underground, say, older than 50. It was very physical work, very demanding work. And by age 50, statistically, they were ready to move on.
For sure, makes
If they
sense.
could.
Makes sense. Yeah, it'd wear on you
But you have to
probably,
remember,
right?
there was no social security at the time, so social safety net. So unless they had savings or some other way of supporting themselves,
Keep
they had to
working.
continue working.
That makes sense. Has there been enough done to protect the memory of the mining and the disasters that have happened?
I think in terms of mining disasters, Nanaimo does commemorate them in terms of the plaques and cairns that are both at the number 1 site and the Wellington mine site, both sides of place of major accidents. But I think what we're looking at is maintaining the heritage of the mines. The people that came here, they came here looking for a better life. They brought their customs and traditions here. Some of those still influence the community today. So I think, apart from the disaster, I think we have to look at the contributions of mining that went into making British Columbia. The coal mines in Nanaimo were the first industrial activity in what became British Columbia. And it was also a departure for the other company that started, the Hudson's Bay Company. Everybody thinks the Hudson's Bay Company, fur trade. But here in Nanaimo, it was very important because it marked a transition into the industrial era and mining.
Perfect. Do students in high school in Nanaimo study this disaster and the mines as well? And do classes tour the museum to learn more about the mining industry?
We have a very active coal mining program that's offered to schools. Most of the students we see here coming to study coal are in elementary school.
Okay.
It ties in with grade 5, grade 6 curriculum. They're the people that we see most. Also a lot of young kids. And of course for many of them the attraction is getting a hard hat on, the light, and going into the coal mine and saying, wow, this is kind of neat.
Right. Was there a regular ferry service to Nanaimo from the mainland during the early years?
In the earliest years, actually, there wasn't much in the Lower Mainland. Vancouver didn't exist. There was regular ferry service from what they used to call Fraser's River, which met New Westminster. That was a primary community in the early days. But most of the traffic here would have been between Nanaimo and Victoria.
Okay. Oh wow. Okay.
Later on, after the railway came into Vancouver, it became the transportation center, and we have the development of private ferries connecting the island to the mainland that way.
Perfect. Was the city of Nanaimo a vibrant area, or was it a quiet town during the mining years?
Well, there was a saying that we had about at least 2 or 3 breweries in Nanaimo, and I think the statistics was 1 pub for every 100 miners. So if that gives you an idea of the community.
Yeah.
But also I think we focus on that side perhaps a bit too much. It was a very vibrant community, very active education system, not only for children but also for adults. Mining was a skilled trade. Many men went back to school to upgrade their education so they could improve their status and opportunities in the mine. There's also a lot of sport, very active sport in Nanaimo with football, rugby, baseball, foot races, all very important. And of course, culture was important too. Music and amateur theater. There was many opportunities for sport and culture in Nanaimo, as there is today.
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess it makes sense for how many pubs are around Nanaimo today too, so I kind of understand. For a young man at this time, what other jobs could he have done in Nanaimo besides working in the mines?
Well, what time period?
I would say the late 19th century. Like
Late 19th century, there was different opportunities for men. You could work in transportation. Certainly there's steamship service on the coast here. There's the railway that needed a lot of work for track crews, things like that. There was a big service industry. There was the foundries. There were things that industries to support the mine operations. There were professions, lawyers, doctors were here. Also professions for women. School teachers, shopkeepers. Nanaimo did have a hospital starting in the 1870s, so some women could find employment there. So there was when the mines were functioning and things were going well, there were a lot of opportunities for people to do many things.
Okay, perfect. And the last question I have for you is, where can people go to find more information on the mining era in Nanaimo?
To find more information about the mining, well, you can come here to the museum. Certainly we have our coal mine exhibition. We also have an archive of a lot of coal mine pictures going back to the 19th century. For more information, photographs, text, you can also go to the Community Archives, which has records as well, as does the BC Archives of Victoria.
Perfect. Perfect. And thank you so much once again for this interview. And I'll be sure to pass on the message of the mining for students and people around Nanaimo.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Great.
In 1891, the South Ward of Nanaimo was home to 1,732 people. Out of this number, 539 men were miners. Most of the miners shared accommodation with other miners in cramped, cheaply constructed homes. It was a very working-class community. Nickel, Haliburton, Irwin, Fry, Esplanade, and Gillespie Street all made up the South Ward. Haliburton had 229 residents, number of miners were 150. Nickel had 144 residents, 87 miners. The family shown in that photo was the Waugh family. This is their house in 2013 Nanaimo. On Nickel Street in 2013 Nanaimo, there are still many houses around that were from the mining era. On Haliburton Street, there are many houses from the mining era still around in 2013 as well. The one thing that would be different would be the people living in these houses would now be doing jobs more relevant to 2013. The Nanaimo Museum has done a very good job in honoring the city's mining era. It has set up artifacts and provides information on the mining era that happened in Nanaimo. If tourists or locals want to find out information of the mining era, the museum is an excellent place to go look. The coal mine is a popular replica exhibit that was built with help from scenic artists working in the movie industry. The coal mine shaft is as close to an actual mine as most people will ever get. Besides having the look and ambience of an underground shaft, there is also an interesting geology component, as well as some interactive displays. Nanaimo's coal deposits were the first known large deposits on the west coast of the Americas. The type of coal was ideal for steam production. The first ship to be loaded with coal was the Cadboro in September 1852. Over the next 100 years, coal mining in Nanaimo provided steady employment. In the 1920s, coal production declined as industries turned to petroleum. Accidents, strikes, and layoffs were commonplace in the lives of Nanaimo miners. The boss whistle, seen here in the photo, was a whistle blown to tell miners when work began and when work ended every day. Overall, the coal mine exhibit is a perfect place to go to find information on the mining era in Nanaimo. But the museum in general does a great job in promoting the city, its history, and even Vancouver Island's history.
Basically, I just grabbed some notes from some scenes like and these things are actually some of the scenes previous and then we're going stuff after.
My name is Brian Barraclough, and my ancestors were Thompsons. My great-great-grandfather was John Thompson. He was actually the youngest person to go on the Princess Royal. He lied about his age. He was supposed to be 21, but he was only 19. He was supposed to be married, virtually got married as he stepped foot onto the boat. Was the first person off the boat here in Nanaimo, lost his shoe apparently and jumping off the boat. Anyhow, he was one of the first contract coal miners in this town, and I think there's a record of that in the museum. They have a copy of the original contract. My great-grandfather, Sam Thompson, his son, started work in the mines as an age of 9, survived 3 mine cave-ins. One he escaped out of a vent shaft out here on Newcastle Island. Another one he was pinned, but was freed by his buddies and got out. So my family has quite a history in the coal mining. I have no desire to be a coal miner or ever have been, but it's a very interesting part of the history of this town.
I would like to thank David Hill Turner, a curator at the Nanaimo Museum, for agreeing to sit down with me and talk about the mining era in Nanaimo, BC. I would also like to thank him for the valuable information that he provided that helped me successfully complete my project, as well as helping me through different stages of my project and telling me where to go to look for information and photos and video. I'd also like to point out that there are many aspects left of the mining era still in Nanaimo in 2013. There are street signs named after some mines, there are buildings named after people affiliated with mines, and there is a museum that dedicates a whole section to the mining era in Nanaimo and Vancouver Island. If locals or tourists would like to find out information about the mining era in Nanaimo, please visit the museum or visit the Nanaimo Archives. These are 2 very valuable sources